You noticed it gradually. And then all at once. The garden looked exactly the same. The flowers were open. The weather was warm. The evenings were the kind of evenings that used to fill the air with sound. But the sound was gone. Not quieter. Gone. No humming near the lavender. No beetles circling the light. No fireflies at dusk. No bees working the flower bed in the morning. You waited a day. Then 3. Then a week. You changed nothing. You stood outside at the times they always came and watched a silent garden and could not figure out what had changed. Here is the truth that nobody tells you. When insects disappear from a garden suddenly and completely, it almost never happens randomly. There is almost always a specific cause. And in the majority of cases, that cause is something the gardener is doing or has stopped doing without realizing it has any effect at all. Today we are going to find it. Welcome to the beetle mystery. In this video we are going through the 8 most common causes of a sudden complete disappearance of insects from a garden. The specific triggers that send them away not gradually but all at once. And for each one we are going to tell you exactly how to know if this is what happened in your garden and exactly what you can do about it today. Stay until the end. Because the last cause is the one that almost nobody thinks of. And the one that explains more sudden disappearances than any other single factor. 1. A predator moved in, and every insect in your garden received the signal simultaneously. This is the most common cause and the one that operates most invisibly. And understanding it requires you to think about your garden not as a space you observe but as a space that is being observed constantly by every creature within it. Insects do not evaluate danger in the moment of encounter. They evaluate it continuously in advance based on evidence that accumulates across hours and days. A single hunting bat that has discovered your garden as a productive foraging site has not just taken a few moths. It has introduced a predator signal into the chemical and acoustic landscape of your garden that every insect capable of detecting it will respond to. Research on insect predator avoidance behavior has documented what ecologists call a landscape of fear effect in insect communities. The tendency of prey species to reduce or cease activity in areas where predator presence has been detected even after the predator is no longer actively hunting. A bat that forages in your garden on 3 consecutive evenings, even if it does not eliminate your entire moth population, is enough to suppress the activity of every moth, beetle, and flying insect in that space for days afterward. Ground predators produce the same effect through different channels. A hedgehog that has discovered your garden as a productive hunting site leaves chemical traces as it moves through the space. These traces are detectable to ground-dwelling insects at concentrations far below what any human nose could register. To a beetle moving through the leaf litter, the garden that was safe yesterday now smells like a place where something that eats beetles has recently been. The insects have not gone far. They are in your neighborhood. They are simply avoiding the specific location where they registered a predator signal. The best thing you can do is keep the garden as it is and wait. The predator will move on or become part of the established landscape. The insects will return when their collective risk assessment determines the area is safe again. This typically takes between 3 days and 2 weeks depending on the species and the intensity of the predator signal. 2. Something in the garden changed, and the insect's map of it no longer matches reality. Insects are creatures of extraordinary spatial precision. They learn the physical structure of a foraging territory with a detail that would surprise most gardeners. The approach routes to specific flowers. The shelter sites near specific plants. The light patterns at specific times of day in specific corners of the garden. The chemical signatures of specific patches of soil. When something in that physical environment changes suddenly, the insect's map of the area no longer matches the reality it encounters. And an insect whose map does not match reality is an insect that does not feel safe. The changes that most commonly trigger insect disappearance are ones that seem minor or entirely unrelated to the insects themselves. A large shrub trimmed significantly near a bee foraging area eliminates shelter and navigational landmarks that the bees were using to orient their approach. A new garden ornament placed near a beetle's regular route introduces an unfamiliar chemical and visual element that has not been assessed. A water feature added near a dragonfly's hunting territory changes the acoustic and reflective landscape of the space. None of these things are dangerous. But insects do not know that yet. And an insect's default response to an unassessed change in a familiar territory is to suspend activity in that area until enough observation has accumulated to categorize the change as safe. Research on bumblebee responses to environmental change in foraging territories has documented that bees will avoid altered areas for between 4 and 12 days following a significant change, gradually reintroducing themselves to the modified space through careful, incremental investigation before resuming normal foraging patterns. If your insects disappeared after you made any change to the garden, however small and seemingly unrelated, wait. The garden does not need to be restored to its previous state. The insects just need time to assess the new reality and update their map. 3. Natural food became so abundant that your garden stopped being necessary. This is the cause that most people never consider. And it is one of the most common explanations for sudden drops in insect activity in gardens that have otherwise done everything right. Insects do not visit specific plants because those plants are their only option. They visit them because those plants represent a reliable and currently optimal food source within their foraging range. When conditions change and better options become available elsewhere, the insects follow the better options. This is not a failure of your garden. It is the insects doing exactly what they should. The two peak periods of natural food abundance that most commonly produce sudden drops in garden insect activity are the peak of summer flowering in the wider landscape, when wildflowers, hedgerows, and field margins are producing nectar and pollen in quantities that dwarf what any garden can offer, and the brief period of late summer seed abundance when grasses and wildplants produce the seeds that many beetles and ground insects depend on. During these periods, it is completely normal for insect activity in a garden to drop by 60 to 80% compared to earlier in the season. The bees are foraging. The beetles are active. They are simply doing it somewhere else right now because somewhere else is currently better. Keep the garden as it is. The insects will return when the wider landscape's abundance passes and your garden's relative value increases again. If your insects disappeared in the peak of July or in late August and the garden is otherwise unchanged, this is almost certainly the explanation. Wait 3 weeks. They will be back. 4. The chemical landscape of your garden changed, and the insects detected it before you did. Insects navigate primarily through chemistry. The floral scents that guide bees to flowers, the pheromone trails that orient beetles through soil, the chemical markers that tell a dragonfly that a particular body of water is a productive territory, all of these are chemical signals in an environment that insects read with sensitivity that makes human olfaction seem primitive by comparison. When the chemical landscape of a garden changes, the insects know before any other indicator has shifted. Before the flowers look different. Before the soil looks different. Before anything visible has changed at all. The most common sources of sudden chemical landscape change in gardens are pesticide drift from neighboring properties, a spray applied next door or in a nearby field that the wind carries into your garden in concentrations you cannot smell but insects can detect and respond to. Changes in the soil chemistry following heavy rain that mobilizes previously bound chemicals. The introduction of new plants whose volatile compounds alter the overall scent profile of the foraging area. And the chemical traces left by pest control treatments applied to structures or surfaces near the garden. Research on bee foraging behavior has documented that bees will avoid foraging areas where they have detected sublethal concentrations of pesticide compounds even when no direct exposure has occurred. The chemical signal of a contaminated environment is enough to redirect foraging behavior away from that area entirely. If your insects disappeared following rain, following any treatment applied to structures near the garden, or following the introduction of new plants from a garden center that may have been treated with systemic pesticides before sale, chemical landscape change is a strong candidate for the cause. The resolution in most cases is time. As compounds break down and the rain washes through, the chemical landscape normalizes and the insects return. 5. A dominant species moved in and excluded everything else. Sometimes the insects have not left the garden. They have simply been displaced from the parts of it they previously used by a more dominant species. And without safe access to their established foraging or resting sites, they stop appearing in the familiar locations. The most common displacement events in garden insect communities involve the arrival of social insects in numbers. A large colony of common wasps establishing a nest near a bee foraging area will, through their patrol behavior and alarm pheromone release, suppress bee activity in the immediate vicinity of the nest significantly. Not because the wasps are actively attacking the bees, but because the chemical and behavioral signals of an established wasp colony register as a persistent threat to other insects in the area. Similarly, the arrival of an invasive ant species in a garden can restructure the entire insect community of that space within days. Ants farm aphids, protect them from predators, and in doing so fundamentally alter the chemical environment of the plants the aphids colonize. Insects that previously used those plants find the altered chemical profile and the aggressive ant patrol behavior reason enough to forage elsewhere. Research on community-level insect displacement has found that the introduction of a single dominant social insect species into an established garden insect community can reduce species diversity in that space by up to 40% within a single season. Look carefully at the areas where you have noticed the disappearance. Look for wasp flight paths indicating a nearby nest. Look at the undersides of leaves for aphid colonies with ant attendants. The insects you are missing are probably still nearby. They are waiting for the displacement pressure to ease before returning to the spaces that were theirs. 6. The light changed, and the nocturnal insects lost their navigation. This one is specific to the disappearance of nocturnal insects, the moths, the beetles, the fireflies, the creatures that filled your summer evenings with movement and sound. And it involves a change so gradual that most people do not notice it has happened until the evenings are already silent. Light pollution is cumulative. A single new streetlight installed at the end of the road. A security light added to a neighbor's garage. A new development half a kilometer away whose lights wash the horizon. None of these changes is individually dramatic. But each one shifts the threshold of darkness that nocturnal insects require to navigate, to find mates, to complete the behavioral programs that their entire adult lives are organized around. Research on the relationship between artificial light and nocturnal insect populations has documented population declines of between 50 and 75% in areas where ambient light levels have increased significantly over a 10 to 15 year period. The insects do not adapt to the new light levels. They simply fail to complete their life cycles in environments where the darkness they require no longer exists. If you have noticed a gradual reduction in evening insect activity over several years that has recently tipped into near-complete silence, light pollution accumulation is a strong candidate. The practical response within your own garden is to eliminate every source of unnecessary artificial light after midnight and to replace any remaining necessary lighting with warm amber bulbs at the lowest effective intensity. You cannot control the light beyond your garden boundary. But you can make your garden, in the darkness that still exists within it, as navigable as possible for the insects that need the dark to live. 7. The season shifted, and the insects you are watching have completed their cycle. This one requires understanding something about insect time that is fundamentally different from the way humans experience seasons. Many of the insects that fill a garden with life during specific weeks of the year are not present for the entire season. They are present for the duration of their adult stage, which in many species is measured not in months but in weeks or even days. The May beetle adult lives for 4 to 6 weeks. The mayfly lives for a single day. Many moth species have adult stages of 2 to 3 weeks maximum. The firefly is visible as a flashing adult for perhaps 3 weeks out of a 2-year life cycle. When these species disappear from your garden, they have not gone elsewhere. They have completed the only part of their life that was ever visible to you. They have mated, laid eggs, and died. The next generation is already underground, already in the soil, already in the eggs attached to the undersides of leaves, already becoming whatever they will spend the next year or 3 years being before they emerge again. The confusion arises because the timing of these disappearances can be sudden and absolute. A garden that was full of a specific species on Tuesday can be entirely without them by Friday because the adult emergence period simply ended. Understanding the specific life cycles of the insects in your garden, which species are present for the whole season and which are present only for specific weeks, helps distinguish a normal cycle completion from a problem that needs addressing. If your May beetles disappeared in mid-June, the cycle is complete. They will be back in 4 years. 8. You changed your routine, and the insects noticed your absence before you noticed theirs. I saved this one for last because it is the least obvious cause and the one that reveals the most about what is actually happening in the relationship between you and the insects sharing your garden. If you have been watching this channel, if you have been spending time outside in the evenings, if you have been present in your garden with the regularity and the quietness that builds the kind of trust we talked about in our last video, then something has happened that you may not have fully understood yet. You have become part of the garden's pattern. Not just for the birds, not just for the mammals that move through at the edges of your awareness, but for the insects. The bees that have learned your foraging schedule. The dragonfly that has mapped your corner of the garden is part of its hunting territory because you are reliably there and reliably still. The beetles that have incorporated the chemical signature of your presence into their understanding of which parts of the garden are safe. Research on insect habituation to consistent human presence has documented that garden insect communities in spaces with regular, predictable, low-disturbance human activity develop different baseline behavior patterns than communities in equivalent spaces without that presence. The consistent human becomes part of the environmental stability that insects use to assess whether a space is safe for foraging, for mating, for the slow careful business of completing a life cycle. When that consistent presence disappears, when you travel for a week, when your schedule shifts and you stop going outside at the same time, when the garden chair sits empty for days at the time it is usually occupied, something shifts in the insect community's assessment of the space.